1945. The sea is calm, but the sky is bruised by war. A lone American submarine breaks the surface, steel rising like a silent fortress beneath the moon. Water cascades from its hull. Hatches unlock with practiced precision. No searchlights, no voices, only the soft clank of metal and the hush of disciplined breath. On the deck, sailors move with urgency, yet something is different. No bomber warming its engines. No pilot climbing aboard. Instead, a strange airframe rests on rails, compact, skeletal, and unsettling. A pilotless aircraft, unheard of in wartime reality. A hand signal, a burst of compressed air. The machine leaps into the night sky, propeller cutting through salt wind. It flies without a cockpit, without eyes, guided only by radio pulses from the submarine below. Miles away, Japanese coastal radar operators later report a flicker, a phantom trace over the water. No engines heard, no pilot seen, nothing to explain its origin. A whisper spreads in intelligence rooms, impossible technology, born from the depths. The world does not yet have a word for drones, but war is inventing one. The Pacific War had become a contest of reach. Who could strike first? Who could see farther? Who could survive long enough to deliver the killing blow? By 1944, the United States Navy commanded the seas, yet domination did not equate to complacency. Every mile toward mainland Japan meant fiercer resistance, unpredictable threats, and the chilling reality of a new enemy tactic, the kamikaze. Human pilots, willing to die. Aircraft turned into guided weapons. Precision through sacrifice. American strategists studied the pattern and drew a stark conclusion. If Japan was willing to spend lives as guidance systems, then the U.S. must pursue machines that cost none. The submarine, once a hunter of ships, was being asked to do more. To spy. To coordinate fleets. And now, quietly, to launch aircraft. Long before sleek ballistic missile submarines prowled the oceans, U.S. naval thinkers imagined underwater platforms as floating airfields, not carriers in the traditional sense, but covert launch points for reconnaissance and strike assets operating unnoticed behind enemy lines. Yet Japan had already taken a bold step of its own. In 1944, the Imperial Japanese Navy unveiled its I-400 class submarines, underwater giants designed to carry aircraft. They could travel around the globe, surface undetected near American shores, launch seaplanes, and disappear again beneath the waves. The Seiran aircraft they carried were compact but real, manned and operational. American intelligence learned of these behemoths late in the war, and the implications were profound. If Japan could fly planes off submarines, then the concept was viable. If Japan could weaponize surprise from beneath the sea, then the U.S. must surpass it. But while Japan looked back, man, machine, cockpit, the United States began to look forward. In hidden workshops and naval research labs, engineers and officers debated a radical question. What if the next aircraft does not need a pilot at all? The idea was not entirely new. As far back as the 1930s, radio-controlled target drones existed. Crude, unreliable, and limited. They served primarily as gunnery practice tools, simple wooden craft to teach anti-air batteries how to track and fire. No one imagined them as weapons. No one saw them carrying reconnaissance payloads or emerging from the ocean's depths. War, however, compresses time. Ideas evolve from concept to necessity overnight. With losses mounting across the Pacific and the final assault on Japan looming, U.S. naval innovators saw an opening. Aircraft launched from submarines could scout ahead of fleets, identify coastal defenses, direct bombardment, or even deliver explosives without risking pilots. They could slip past radar under low-altitude profiles, strike targets inaccessible to bombers, and return no bodies to grieving families. It was a future born not from curiosity, but from survival instinct and strategic imagination. The Navy Bureau of Aeronautics, alongside emerging research groups under the National Defense Research Committee, quietly funneled resources into remote guidance aviation, gyroscopic stabilizers, simplified autopilot circuits, primitive television guidance experiments, and, crucially, radio command control, step by step. The idea hardened into metal and wiring. At sea, submarine crews heard whispers, but knew little. A weapon with no pilot? A machine that would fly and strike on command? To many, it sounded like fiction. Yet prototypes were already being machined. In experimental facilities along American coastlines, engineers rolled strange fuselages beneath tarps, with no cockpits carved into their frames. Naval officers watched test signals arc across consoles. Propellers spun, wings flexed. Remote control signals pulsed through wires and antennas. Unmanned aviation, not yet called drones, not yet trusted by commanders, was moving from theory toward battlefield utility. And out on the Pacific, American submarines were preparing for missions no sailor in 1942 could have imagined. The United States believed the war's end would be decided not only by men with rifles and ships with guns, but by innovation, invisible, unexpected, and relentless. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Japanese military planners held firm to doctrines built on honor, sacrifice, and the human hand guiding the machine. They had not yet imagined a future where the machine might guide itself. They would soon confront that future, not in textbooks or theory, but in the final, desperate months of war. New kind of weapon was coming to the Pacific. And it would take flight from beneath the waves. The United States had long recognized the value of remote-controlled flight, even before war engulfed the Pacific. In the late 1930s, as global tensions simmered, American naval engineers experimented with radio-controlled target aircraft under classified projects. These early drones were simple, fragile, and frequently unreliable. But they represented a technological seed, one that would grow rapidly once the nation mobilized for total war. By 1942, something important was happening in American laboratories. Command systems, stabilization, gyros, and radio transmitters were improving faster than ever before. The war was accelerating invention. What had begun as training targets soon gained new potential, reconnaissance, and eventually strike missions without risking a pilot. Across the Atlantic, the Allies observed Germany's V-1 flying bomb, an unmanned jet-powered missile launched at London in 1944. It was crude, terrifying, and strategically transformative. American engineers studied the concept and began developing their own version, the JB-2 Loon, a U.S. copy of the V-1. Though it was not born for submarine use, its existence proved something vital. Unmanned flight could be weaponized at scale. The U.S. Navy saw an opportunity. If a pilotless craft could be launched from land, why not from beneath the sea? The concept was ambitious, almost fantastical for its time. Submarines already operated under suffocating constraints. Limited deck space, vulnerability on the surface, delicate balance systems, and narrow operational windows. To introduce aircraft, even small ones, meant solving engineering problems few naval architects had ever considered. Where would they be stored? How would they be stabilized on deck? Could delicate electronics survive pressure, humidity, and salt corrosion? And most critically, could a submarine remain undetected long enough to launch an aircraft? Yet the U.S. Navy persisted. Engineers explored folding wings, sealed storage tubes, catapult rails, and compact radio-controlled units that could operate from submerged vessels once masts were raised. In wind tunnel rooms and test basins, what seemed like fiction began to take shape in wood, steel, and bakelite circuitry. While the American program matured, Japan's technological path diverged. Rather than exploring unmanned flight, it doubled down on the human element. Precision bombing remained a matter of pilot experience. Scouting relied on courage and eyesight. When faced with overwhelming U.S. industrial power and the crumbling perimeter of its defensive ring, Japan leaned toward ultimate sacrifice: human-guided weapons, flown with finality. It was a strategy built on valor, not electronics. As Japanese engineers refined seaplanes for submarine carriers, U.S. researchers were wiring small servomotors into prototype aircraft bodies, teaching wings to respond to radio pulses instead of human hands. They tested guidance receivers the size of shoeboxes, primitive by later standards, but groundbreaking then. Observers in lab coats watched oscilloscopes flicker as signals locked onto airborne test craft. Most Americans, even many sailors and officers, had no idea such experiments existed. Meanwhile, intelligence units in Tokyo remained confident in their assessments. The United States excelled in mass production and naval gunnery, not advanced automation. Japan's own aviation experts believed that if victory depended on spirit and sacrifice, machines without men could never hold the decisive edge. But the balance of thinking was shifting. Each island seized in the Pacific brought American submarines closer to enemy waters and new operational needs. A submerged vessel could scout but could not see far. Radar masts could rise, but detection risked death. An aircraft launched from a submarine, however, could extend vision beyond the horizon, silently and without risking a pilot. And for the first time, there was a system capable of doing it, not theory, but machine. War is often remembered in steel and strategy, but it is lived by hands and hearts. The sailors aboard America's submarines were not dreaming of technological revolutions. They were young men, tired, focused, and burdened by the weight of unseen combat beneath thousands of miles of ocean. To them, the arrival of a pilotless aircraft on the deck felt surreal. They were accustomed to torpedoes, periscopes, and silent patience. Now, they stood beside an object that defied instinct. A flying machine with no cockpit, no breathing soul, no parachute waiting inside. Whispers spread through cramped compartments. Was it safe? Would it work? Sailors who had watched comrades die in dogfights now watched engineers tinker with wires in salt-soaked air. The ocean swallowed sound, and fear had no place to hide. Men trusted machines because they had to, not because they believed in them. The emotional paradox struck deep. Pilots on carriers risked everything each time they launched. Here, something else would take the leap. It felt like cheating fate, or perhaps sparing it. Some crewmen reportedly stared as the small craft lifted off, feeling the same awe that earlier generations felt watching the first steamships or telegraphs. It wasn't just technology. It was a moment when the future briefly appeared, hovered, and disappeared into the dark horizon. Japan, too, felt the emotional wound, though it came later. In the quiet aftermath, scientists who prided themselves on discipline and innovation studied captured notes of American unmanned tests and felt a sting that transcended defeat. They had given everything: skill, loyalty, lives, and discovered they had overlooked a path that required no sacrifice at all. Pilotless flight was not merely a technical shift, it was a shift in the psychology of warfare. The machine had begun to stand, where the pilot once did, and the men who witnessed that first ascent whether on a submarine deck or in a captured lab, reading Allied reports. Never forgot it. War forces. Nations to decide how much humanity they are willing to surrender to survive. For centuries, courage meant being willing to face death, to look the enemy in the eye through the windscreen, through a rifle sight, through distance that still felt human. But the submarine-launched unmanned aircraft challenged that narrative. If no pilot died, did courage still matter? If no one was aboard, where did honor reside? If a weapon struck unseen and unpiloted, who owned the responsibility? The person who pressed the switch, or the machine that flew alone? These questions had no easy answer in the 1940s. They still do not today. Japan viewed warfare as an expression of spirit. A machine without a man lacked soul, purpose, meaning. It was a hollow arrow. America, scarred by losses at Midway, Guadalcanal, and Okinawa, viewed warfare with increasingly pragmatic eyes. Lives were precious. Technology was a shield against grief. To send a machine instead of a pilot was not to erase honor. It was to preserve it. This divide foreshadowed a world where ethics and electronics would collide. The seeds planted in those submarine hangars would grow into debates about autonomy, accountability, and the value of the human role in conflict. Even as the Pacific burned, these questions flickered quietly in the minds of those who realized what they were witnessing. The moment where war began moving beyond flesh and blood. No idea in wartime grows without pressure. Victory demands creativity, and desperation accelerates evolution. The United States had industrial might, but it also faced brutal lessons. Pearl Harbor, Bataan, Tarawa. Each loss carved urgency into command decisions. Unmanned flight was not born from academic speculation. It was hammered together by necessity. Submarines navigated waters thick with mines and patrols. Carrier pilots faced storms of anti-air fire. Every mission risked irreplaceable lives. And behind every casualty stood families waiting for uniforms on doorsteps. America's answer was innovation. Rapid, relentless, unapologetic innovation. Guidance circuits were tested on benches by men who knew failures meant wasted resources, but successes meant saved futures. Submarine commanders accepted experimental missions because the war demanded risk. Radio operators learned new frequencies and codes, expanding their skill set overnight. It was not ambition, it was duty reshaped by necessity. Japan innovated too, but along a different axis. It pushed metallurgy, engine tuning, and aerodynamics to their limits. Yet when fuel ran low and experienced pilots dwindled, Japan turned toward sacrifice, not circuitry. Two nations faced the same pressure. One spent blood, the other spent electricity. In that divergence lay the quiet birth of a new military paradigm. One that would define the Cold War, the 21st century, and the ocean depths where unmanned craft still glide today. And as these forces converged, the Pacific prepared for a moment when hidden submarines would send winged instruments of the future into combat skies. A turning point approached. Silent, unseen, and unlike anything the world had yet known. In the final year of the war, the Pacific trembled under decisive momentum. The United States tightened its noose around the Japanese Empire. Iwo Jima in February 1945, Okinawa in April. Each island fell at terrible cost. Each battle hardened American resolve. The next phase had to be smarter, not bloodier. Deep in naval intelligence vaults and experimental stations, the unmanned concept matured. Engineers refined guidance signals, strengthened airframes against salt corrosion, and rehearsed procedures for submarine deployment. Submarine crews practiced assembly and launch drills on decks cleared under strict secrecy. Instructors issued cryptic briefings. You will assist in testing a new strike and reconnaissance capability. Yet the battlefield moved faster than time would allow. Japan collapsed before submarine-launched unmanned aircraft could see combat. Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended the war in August 1945, and the secret drone program crossed a threshold. What had been urgent wartime development now shifted into careful post-war trials. And then, history turned quietly. In January 1947, the USS Cusk surfaced off Point Mugu, California. The ocean lay still, not unlike the wartime nights when prototypes were conceived under red-shaded lamps. Sailors rolled a missile onto deck rails. The U.S. Navy's version of the German V-1, designated the JB-2 Sen, Yonchiti-2 Loon. It was not elegant, but it represented something profound. The first submarine-launched, controlled unmanned flight vehicle in American naval history. No enemy watched. No gunfire answered. Yet, the tension rivaled combat. The launch crew secured the missile, checked linkages, armed its primitive autopilot, and stepped back as the countdown reached 0. A shudder, a blast. The craft leapt from the deck into open sky, engine screaming over Pacific foam. The submarine transmitted commands through a trailing antenna mast, guiding the flying machine not with instinct, but with mathematics and signal pulses. Where wartime tests had been conceptual, this moment was proof. A weapon, pilotless, launched at sea, controlled remotely, was no longer a plan. It was airborne. The USS Carbonero joined the trials soon after. The Navy tested different guidance ranges, launch procedures, and flight profiles. Engineers tracked telemetry in command rooms. Sailors watched vapor trails vanish toward the horizon. And admirals saw not a novelty, but a strategic horizon opening before them. The Pacific, once a chessboard of carriers and battleships, now held a glimpse of silent reach. A submarine could hide beneath the ocean, rise briefly, release a weapon, and disappear again before radar sweeps returned. It did not need a runway. It did not need a pilot ready to die. It only needed signal integrity, fuel, and discipline. Reports circulated through military intelligence channels around the world. Former Japanese naval engineers, now assisting Allied technical review teams or reading declassified fragments, confronted a stunning reality. While they had built the largest submarine carriers in history, the Americans had already begun evolving past pilots entirely. One Japanese engineer later remarked in disbelief when shown Allied guidance schematics. "We expected advanced planes. We did not expect planes without pilots."